Well, I think it'll, end the chapter of his career of James Harden as an unquestioned, top 15 player, top 20 player. And I think more importantly, Brew, historically, I a few years ago said that I thought James Harden was the best player in NBA history who didn't win a ring. It was him and Elgin Baylor. And that was dead ass wrong. It's just flatly wrong. I was projecting. I was like, well, he's going to continue on this pace. And now, Brew, when we talk about it, let's talk about the guys who don't have rings. Is Harden one of the 5 best guys without a ring? Is Harden better than Charles Barkley? No. Is Harden better than Karl Malone? No. Is Harden better than Elgin Baylor? Now, listen, I know J.J. Redick might get mad at me, but Elgin Baylor was a great player. We don't have to relitigate it. The answer to that is no. And clearly, Harden's not better than CP3. Clearly. Now, CP3 might remove himself from this list in 6 weeks, but he has to deal with a lot of things, Luka Doncic and the curse of the Broussard, so I'm not certain if he will. But that's 5 names I just gave you. Listen, I'll give you a Harden over Patrick Ewing. I'll give you a Harden over Allen Iverson, Harden over Russell Westbrook because of what he accomplished in the regular season. But hell, even Iverson and Ewing had at least a singular playoff season better than anything Harden's put together. I still think his resume overall is better than theirs. All of it takes a hit if his time as a truly great player is over before we expect it.
Yeah, well, let me say this first, Nick. I do think what Harden's doing now in this playoff series, because that was a question, if they don't make this thing competitive, what he's really hurting is his future. All right, will he get a long-term lucrative contract extension? Because I think that's what he's definitely putting in jeopardy. Maybe if not in the eyes of Daryl Morey, then maybe in the eyes of Philadelphia ownership. So that is in serious jeopardy. His future more so than his past or his legacy that we're talking about. But to go to the question, look, I do think Elgin Baylor is the best player never to win a championship. And I have Barkley and Karl Malone and Chris Paul certainly ahead of Harden. You kind of have Stockton and Malone together all the time. And with Stockton's numbers, steals, assists, he's just light years ahead of everyone else in terms of total steals and assists. So you probably have to put him ahead of Harden too. But so that's the first group. That's the 5. I've got Harden now in that second 5 with Iverson, Patrick Ewing, George Gervin. I do have him ahead of maybe these guys are in that group too, Westbrook and Steve Nash. But that's the group I believe Harden's in now.
Yeah, me too.
Here's the interesting thing, Wilds. Because of the age that we are in and that Harden plays in, the technology now, the internet, social media, even shows like this, right? Debate shows where we talk about these things ad nauseum. Will that make Harden's or any player for that matters, failures and shortcomings more memorable than they have been for past generations? Because typically, even if a guy's gotten criticized when he played, that kind of goes away once he retires. And we remember the great moments. Yeah, he never won a ring, but this dude was awesome. He's a Hall of Famer. He's all-time great, all that. I'm starting to wonder if because of today's era and technology, if stuff won't go away so quickly. Here's an example. Charles Barkley, who we all just remember as an awesome player. Yeah, he never won a ring, but it wasn't Charles's fault. Charles was fantastic. But look at these quotes that Scottie Pippen, the 6-time champion, when he said these quotes. Charles will never win a championship because he doesn't show any dedication. Very selfish guy. Doesn't show the desire to want to win. He owes me an apology for coming to play with his fat butt. That's what Pippen said about the great Charles Barkley. That first quote, too, that is here's the full quote. Pippen said, I should have listened to Michael Jordan a year ago when he told me Charles would never win a championship because he doesn't show any dedication. Now, if Kevin Durant came out and said, man, look, I should have listened to CP3. CP3 told me after he played with Harden, he ain't dedicated. He'll never win a championship with that guy because he's not dedicated. We would say, oh my gosh, his legacy is totally flattened. Like this will never be lived down. And yet with Barkley, we don't think of those things. So I just wonder. I mean, because to me, Harden is in the same space as most of the guys that haven't won. There's a reason Elgin Baylor, he went to 7 finals, never won, and then the year he retires 10 games into the season, they win with the same team, the Lakers. They had Wilt, they had Jerry West, so you would look at that like, wow, is that saying something about Baylor? Karl Malone shot 44% in the 97 finals against the Bulls. And in 98, Jordan stripped Malone of the ball, right? Malone got the strip by Jordan, a guard, before Jordan hit the iconic shot to end the series. I brought up Barkley. Iverson, we could talk about, well, he didn't like to practice. He wasn't a defense. So my point is, all of these guys that haven't won, we could point out some negatives, and Harden's no different from that. But I wonder if this stuff may stick to him longer, Wilds, just because of the era that we're in today.
It's interesting. That's an interesting take. And to build off of it, I don't think it will, Broussard, because incremental decline or increases doesn't really show up. It doesn't move the meter like stark highlights or lowlights do. Like, I would argue that Russ shooting the ball almost over the backboard is something that people could point to and say, look, Russ is not the guy he used to be. The old defensive tape that was put together of Harden letting guys go past him, I thought that was damaging to him. Same as like Baker Mayfield, the quick tape of him missing Odell. That's damaging. But a slow erosion of skill, I don't think is as damaging because there's not one thing to point to in sort of a headline, sort of back page of the newspaper, if you will. The question I have for you is this, Nick. Do you think, you mentioned closing a chapter on James Harden's career, the chapter of him being one of the best players. What does this next chapter look like? Because I don't understand why James Harden isn't playing like Chris Paul right now or can't play like Chris Paul. Chris Paul is older, and he had a hamstring. Good call, Jenna. And is Chris Paul's handle that much better than James Harden? I don't think so. Does Chris Paul know more tricks than James Harden? No. I don't think so.
No.
Passes, I can make a highlight reel of Chris Paul passes and James Harden's passes, and they would work. You could say leadership, Chris Paul has a big advantage. Go ahead.
No, it's time, score, situation, understanding. Chris Paul understands the game of basketball in a way like there are, in my lifetime, 4 people that stand out above everybody else. Magic Johnson, Isaiah Thomas, LeBron James, and Chris Paul. And that's not a shot at Michael, but Michael's greatness was his pure will, combined with the athleticism, the skill, everything. But the way Chris has known forever how to manipulate, and I'd say that in a positive way, the end of games, how to understand that this entire thing is building towards a finish, as opposed to there are certain guys, Harden and Russ are 2 of them, who look at each individual possession as a solo moment in history. There are other guys that understand all of these possessions are a brushstroke on a painting. And at the end of it, we want it to look as beautiful as possible. So you can't all of a sudden change. Like, Chris Paul has been building this since he was 14 years old. Like, it is not a coincidence that the best Chris Paul story there is the one, it's a sad one, but right after his grandfather passed away, he had never scored 45 in an amateur game. His grandfather was, I think, 61, and he scores exactly 61 and walks off the court crying. That's not a mistake. It's because he always knew how to get to whatever gear he needed to get to. That's not who James Harden has been. So, no, he can't. Flatly, Brew, he cannot have a Chris Paul final act. It's not who he is.
Well, but I'll give
just
Wild,
throwing stuff
like,
in the
I
ground.
think he could be more like Chris Paul. He could be more like Chris Paul. Here, Harden got spoiled playing in Mike D'Antoni's system. Because Harden does have a high basketball IQ. He's got all the skills he needs to be a great playmaker, and he is a great playmaker. But be playing for Mike D'Antoni for that many years, he got used to over-dribbling, ball dominant, it's all about me, I do whatever.
Yeah.
And that's hard to come out of. So that's a big part of the problem, Miles, because if he could stop over-dribbling and move the ball quickly, he couldn't be CP3, but I do think, Nick, he could be more in that direction than he is right now and still be successful over the next few years.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from First Things First, or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.